Thank you all for coming. Great, we have a packed house. We are very excited to have Micaela Sviatschi, who braved the winter weather to fly in yesterday and back by the day of vacation to come talk to us. She's one of the world's leading experts in crime, especially crime in Latin America. 5 or 6 years ago, I became friends with Mika. We were in Colombia, and she was asking me for career advice because she was a brand new assistant professor. And last week when she was coming, I looked at her CV, and it looks like I have to start asking her for everything she's written. I mean, she's a rock star. Everything she's written has been published in a top journal and has gotten huge amounts of media attention. It's all very well earned. She's now a tenured professor at Princeton. She did this all, I'm probably not supposed to say this, but she did this all while getting married and having 2 kids, which I have to say is just absolutely extraordinary. I don't know how she does it, but we're very happy to have her. And so let's give her a warm welcome. She's going to take questions as we go. People that are online, apparently there's a button somewhere down below where you can submit your questions. That's what Teresa tells me. We're going to do this econ style, so questions as you go, but economists, let's not try to be overly annoying.
Thank you so much, Joe, for the introduction. Really, I appreciate it. It's true that I met Joe 5 years ago, and he was very good senior of talking and giving advice. So I really encourage always the students also to approach senior people, especially like Joe, that are very generous with their time. And thank you so much for all the interaction. I don't think I'm an expert. This is something I started working when I was even doing the PhD, more than 10 years ago, because I think the issues of security, as you all know, are the #1 reason in Latin America. And there is a lot to learn. So in the agenda that we are, many people here works on this, that we are really trying to learn about what things can work to prevent expansion of an organization. And I think that we don't know that much. So I'm very welcome to feedback. Even today, I was talking with some faculty here and I didn't even know about certain programs that are interesting to know. So I'm really, please feel free to stop me and learn together about how we can deal with this. So this is not work that I have done alone. It's joined with Elena Castro, with John Hopkins, Felipe Foy in Berkeley, and Carlos Padilla. We have been working with Carlos with a lot of projects together in El Salvador. So the motivation, as I was saying, is very clear for me. As many of you know, criminal organizations have gained control over the state territory in many countries, especially in Latin America. When you look at the statistics, for instance, in Mexico, 20% of the territory is under the influence of cartels, trafficking groups. Also, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, 56% of the territory have some armed groups. And the case that I will focus today, which is El Salvador, which we know that by 2015, you have that more than 50% of the municipalities have some gang operation in those places. So why is it important to the territorial control? Well, it's not per se that the state does the monopoly of violence in those places, but the fact that these criminal organizations, to gain control of the territory, they compete using violence. Different than other things here, they compete, the main way that they compete, they don't compete with prices, they compete with violence. And the second thing is that even when violence declines, and one of these criminal organizations can get the monopoly of violence, they can have other negative economic consequences, which we have been studying. For example, one that we have seen is restrictions to mobility, that they use the territory to run their businesses, to extort people, and also to recruit children and adults. And these have a lot of economic consequences, which we study in other papers that I will go briefly when we go to the background on these other papers that I have done with co-authors. So this was a big issue, and the question was, okay, how can the states prevent the territorial expansion of criminal organizations? This is that we don't know an answer really about how we can prevent it, but we will try to shed light on this stuff. So when we look at the literature, the traditional crime reduction policies often struggle to weaken this growth. So the traditionals are massive incarceration, intensifying police. Sometimes they can backfire, displacing criminal organizations, and sometimes penalizing potential victims. And also it's not obvious, given the situation of prisons, that they will, reduce the expansion of criminal organizations, because we know that many criminal organizations actually they expanded and were born within the prison systems that are not strong. So this leaves us, okay, we have these measures that we know from the evidence that they can work or not, depending on how they are done. And on the other extreme, we have more preventive approaches, like for example, behavioral therapy, cash assistance, that when they are affecting certain concepts, they can be ineffective in the context of organizations. Why? Because here, as I told you before, the main source of violence is strategic. It's not just short-sighted or single-sided. Violence is decided, strategic to compete for that. So this behavioral techniques alone may not be as effective under the presence of organizations and continuous court. So then, okay, what can we do about it? So here, what we are going to focus is recruitment, okay? Some common aspects that we observe of all organizations across the world is that they recruit and use children and adolescents for their operations, okay? And it's this recruitment that allows to renew the cycle, and actually, this recruitment can hinder any effort that you put, for instance, incarceration. I can arrest, but then they can recruit a new kid very easily, okay? So you see, so when we look at these organizations, we see that they are very labor intensive, and that children join at a very young age. For instance, in the case of El Salvador, the average age of entry was 15. In the case of narcotraffic areas in Peru that I have studied, some kids were joining very early, 11, 14. And even in the US, when you look at some statistics, they say 1/3 of the gang members are underage. So it seems that, this recruitment fits this criminal labor supply. So then we start asking, okay, is there a way that disrupting recruitment can behave criminal organizations in the long run? And then this brings another question, no? How can we stop recruitment to see how this end up affecting them? And here is where we have these two questions. Okay, sorry. So we didn't know, so we were okay, maybe we can look about policies to reduce recruitment. And then we realized, okay, there are not that many, so we don't know how to stop recruitment. And then if you get that, is it really the case that this will be having some long-term criminal involvement and kind of gang activity? And the idea with here, what I had in my mind from previous work was, it's really the case that gangs can strategically substitute kids with adults, and it's really that they can absorb any increase in recruitment costs. So to answer all these questions, in El Salvador, we find like the ideal natural experiment for two reasons. One is a policy that was, for me when I was there, was very novel to see, which was done by the Ministry of Justice and Public Security and UNDP, which was called Safe Schools. This policy was using preventive policing patrols at the time that kids enter and exit schools, okay? So, and the focus of these police patrols, because first was preventive. The second thing is that they have to have a particular focus on safety and reducing gang recruitment. You may be thinking, why are they having this very extreme policy? I didn't give you any background, but this is why you get into this situation. By that time, you will be thinking, why schools, why surroundings? Well, some issue that was happening in El Salvador, and actually now it's happening also in other countries in Latin America, is that schools are grounds for recruitment. The place where a lot of these criminal actors go and try to convince students and recruit them from the parents. This is something that has been observed. In El Salvador by 2015 was the extreme. That was one of the primary grounds of recruitment, because since gangs have territorial control, the use of public spaces was much more limited. Okay? So in terms of identification here for the content, this was not an RCT. It's not that I designed this program joining the university. No, this program was already in place. I found out about it when I was doing another paper. And I was like, what is this? And I was curious about it. So it will be like just an event study. We will do now, we show you synthetic and the normal event study, but we are doing other reference with any techniques. Everything is closed. But what we are thinking about here is that they have a set of course, this program didn't target, graduates before, they went to places, to schools that have the highest risk of having these gang things around. So were very like high crime areas. But what they were doing was like, they have some in this index, they thought, okay, first we're going to go to these 128 schools, and then in 2018, by the end of 2018, we are going to cover other sectors. The problem is that then there was a government change in 2019 that you may know, and then they cut this second group. So this second group of schools that were pre-selected and very similar in the criminal outcomes as the ones that were treated will work as our portfolio, and we will just do it before and after 2016 and 2017. Then, to understand generally we will take speed hours, we're going to use the whole set of schools, but for the main results, will be to share. And actually, there were two things that were very interesting of the case of El Salvador. One was the setting of the policy that I thought was, for me, the part that was more interesting about that policy is that it had a particular focus only on gang recruitment. So it was police that was there not to reduce extortion, was the main business, was just to cut students' gang interaction. And the second thing, the data. And it had very nice data to evaluate, to measure how recruitment can affect the expansion of gangs and their business. And the data consists of this. We have dropout rates that are measured by following up kids over the school system. So they have an ID and a school ID for kids. So we can see not only if you drop out from school, or actually if you drop out of the system. If you disappear from the education system, I can see whether you disappear or not. This is good for any migration story that you can be thinking, okay, you're counting as a dropout, someone that is not there in that school, but maybe is in another school of migration within the country. And the second thing that I thought that was the most interesting is this data on gang recruitment that came from the intelligence that used informants in the field to basically to put in a data set any time that they would observe through informants whether a kid started joining a gang or not. Actually, it was not only for adolescents, also we have some adults that we can see. So anyone in this territory, so they have this, of course, it has a measurement error. Nothing is perfect. This is measured through local NGOs, the church have a big role of providing information to this data. But what's very important for us is that this data was collected by the National University. It was independent from these local police and doing the patrol. So at least we can have some kind of objective measure, which we are going to triangulate also using juvenile detention records and to measure whether kids that are affected by the policy, whether they are still involved in crime, in gang-related crime. We're going to look, we have all the incarceration records, also adults, and we are going to combine this with police complaints on extortion and prison visits and health centers. Yes.
As a sample, I mean, the police can threaten there in school. It's going to reduce the recruitment, but also it's going to reduce the crime in schools, like selling drugs in the school, high school. So there is a high probability that the students are going to go to jail. There's a lot of people in that school.
Yes, and this is the key thing about like this policy and how it was done. First is that what they were using was preventive police, not that they send, the SWAT team there like to try. And the second part is that there was a requirement. It's not that any police officer could be part of this. And they didn't have to have any record of violence in their TV history. That's the other thing that they have. And they couldn't enter schools to do, these operations inside. The only time that they entered school was to provide information about the product, why the police was there, and they did twice per year in the talks. But it's true, and let me just one more thing. It's true that that there was, and at least for me, there is this tension that if you put police there, they should increase, like there would be the detentions, and then this can, backfire because then you would put kids in juvenile detentions, and we know from the literature that this can be also generating criminal scars and so on. So what we are doing, and that's why for us was very important to get this data during the detention, is we look by different ages. When you see a result, you will see, and we don't see any increase in this juvenile detention. The opposite, we see a decline, if anything, in these school surroundings relative to the other schools that were supposed to be treated they did over time. So that's how, and then, so our analysis will rely a lot also a bit on the cohort analysis, that we will see that we start with the assumption, okay, is it really that there are key ages that they are more likely to be recruited? and maybe I think the next slide when I show you the results is, but ex ante is true. Like when you see police there, probably you are like, a lot of the other type of crimes can be affected. But we look at the data and we don't see anything. And this is consistent because when we were asking this police patrols, I was like, oh, if you are here and I'm having a business here and I come and it's like, look, they came to extort me. What do you do? They said like they stand up to the police station. They cannot deal with that because their main thing is to basically clean the neighborhood, that there is no gangs, they are in the school surroundings recruiting. That was the main focus of this policy. And that's why also the other presumption that I have that was against this was like, you put police, gangs see police there, this increased violence immediately, because this is how it is every time police would enter this neighborhood. But since it was prevented, was not, when we have the data on police violence, we don't see any spike there. And I think that's are the things that counteract this, that there will be an increase, that will prevent the police with a particular focus on what they have to do and not targeting these other types of crimes.
Maybe I might have misunderstood what Aitor's question was, but are you arguing that all of this happens through the gang recruitment channel? Or is gang recruitment just one of your outcomes? And it's kind of like, you just want to see what are all the impacts of this policing?
No, so what we are arguing is that it's one of the main channels. So I'm using the policy to try to understand how recruitment affects whether you still are there once they don't recruit you in these key ages, and also to see how it affects a video operation of gangs. So I'm using this like as variation, but it's true, as Aitor completed there will be other channels. I'm just saying these are not the main ones that can be driving these results. But it's true that when you put police at first, like there would be something about safety that is going on even for young, and we see some effects for younger ages as well.
You're not trying to argue that the policing is an instrument for recruitment and everything else falls.
Yes, exactly. No.
It's a clarification.
But we try to convince that it's the main channel here.
Yeah, there's a question there for it, but I have a clarification after. Right, where do you go?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so are you gonna argue that the control is not also affected? Because in a way, like, if I'm a gang, I'm recruiting, there's two schools that are very similar, but then one of them has a bunch of police presence, and then the other one, like, I don't know if the police presence even declined afterwards, because you have to, or even if it stayed the same, it now becomes, more attractive as a place of recruitment. So it seems like you have some information about recruitment, so
Yes, all these are valid questions, and it's related. So what you're asking is about spillover effects to even that could invalidate my design if these control schools are nearby these areas, but actually these control schools that I'm using are in different municipalities.
Right.
And what I will, and it will come to this part, is I'm trying to give you the short answer for something that is a bit long, but is the following. Is if you take into account the structure of these organizations of the gangs, actually they are two main gangs, but they are divided in kind of franchises that are different cliques. And it's not that easy for you, if you are controlling this territory, it's a small clique, a small territory, to go now to the next door clique, which is controlled by, we are from the same gang, you and me, to go and recruit to the other. In the long run, there will be some strategic response. But if we increase the cost, because these territories they really rely on the recruitment of their territory where they are sent. And it's consistent with what we observe in the data, that we don't see any negative spillover, that now they start recruiting in nearby schools that did not receive the patrols. Okay? So, and we don't see anything that moving in these control schools that are further away. But we are going to do this analysis to select. But everything is consistent on the way that they were organized. Of course, if it is the territory that that is larger and the patrol and there are other schools, it's possible that they will substitute. The only substitution that we are seeing a bit, and it's a very exploratory evidence, is in prisons. Because there is these gangs control a lot, the prison, the big gang leaders are in prison and they control from there, from that. They also have some type of criminal governance there where they define the strategies and recruitment. And we start seeing some movement on how, when I call movement, is like whether you were someone from these neighborhoods that experienced the patrol, whether post-program you start receiving more visits in these places. And we start seeing there something. That's the only, yes.
It was a question of the outcomes that you are examining. So first, like the data set of the schools actually do have information from the principals as informants on gun recruitment and also presence. And so I was just curious. I mean, I understand that it's better that comes from a different source, but just a question on whether you actually triangulate your data that is external to the reports from that's
Yes,
one
you're right.
question, but
We haven't done it, but you're right that there is this data, but we don't have it we don't have it, I think, post period, the data from the principals, that there is like this sense of where the principals say like whether there is gang exposure and drugs that they used to construct the index for the allocation of the brand, but they don't have it for post period, and that's why we couldn't. But what we could do, because if we have, is to try to see how much the gang recruitment is there in those, and we haven't, but it's a good idea.
and just a quick follow-up on outcomes. I mean, the program is militarization of schools. That's how it has been framed, and I mean, the media and scholars on criminal governance. And so, first of all, like I was wondering, what's the preventive? So what is the treatment, right? So is it just presence and intimidation? And related to this, in terms of, I wonder about any measures that you might have on unintended consequences. Like based on my own work, I mean, I have, like suggestions from the data that you are also using, but also from fieldwork of intimidation of girls by, the military, because it's police, but it's military as far as I understand.
No, this is not military.
It's
What that we're
police.
using here is not military.
Yeah, and okay, yeah. And so what are other unintended effects, right, of intimidation of school teachers and so on, particularly knowing the background and even now, right? Like
That's why I think it's very important to do that focus, because the type of police that they use here is selected. It's not the average police officer in El Salvador. It has to be someone with no violent record, with preventive approach, that they will go there and just to clean the area. It's true that they have guns and they have to have some source of intimidation. That is right. It's not that the civilians there in the surroundings, like a group of parents, will make the same. But in this context, that you know very well, it's like you really need to work with law enforcement to make it work. Because there was something out there that were like criminal actors that a parent could not prevent it. They were in such a desperate situation that you have seen in the news how they were sending their kids outside. So, but I want to make emphasis on this point that it was not the average police officer. And this is something that came out in all our interviews when we were talking about, like with the principal, and we're saying like, no, these police officers were not it was within, there is a point that is important. It was within the current police force. There was no, new selection. Within that current police force that they selected the ones that happened.
Excellent. I think building off of Abby's point, I think it'd be good if you can maybe give us some context about policing in El Salvador. Because I think that one thing that maybe American audiences might react to is equating the type of policing and infrastructure and budgets that we have here versus in Salvador, right? Is this PNC? What kind of budgets we're talking about? And especially since in El Salvador, you have a lot of, especially at this time in El Salvador, which is a key thing to distinguish as well. This is not after the gang crackdown. This is prior to that.
Prior.
So this is not militarization. This is not that.
Yeah.
But to talk about what it is that was going on in terms of the, relationships between the police, the local police who are in far-flung places in the middle of the mountains and rural areas with low budgets and gangs.
No, you're right. And I don't have the slide about the relation with the police, but it's true that in this, all this, what I'm going to show you, finished in 2019 on my data. And actually, it's mainly because we don't have all the collaboration was with previous government to share data. And post-Bukele, it's when it started 2019 that the data sharing unfortunately stopped. And they also have that massive crackdown, as they was saying. And that's where they use other type of police, militarization and everything. But at least for this program, I know that they didn't, because we have the information about the police officers, we have the background about the violence history. So we have very detailed records of these police and even the studies, which were the, so we can see that was selected, yeah, which were the type of police officers. But you're right, I should have included, because it's not that they have a lot of budget here and they have to work with the current police force that they have. And that's what I found that was interesting about the program, because even with the few resources they have, they just did a selection and they did something very simple. It was just patrolling the school surroundings before, some hours before the entrance of kids and after, to try to prevent these interactions. And they do also a lot of campaign there. They were there and they were saying, like, we are here to provide safety from my members. But there is some, deterrent effect about punishment and intimidation can go there. But this is how it was a problem. And at least we try to measure whether there were some unintended consequences, because when we started, we were agnostic about how it would be by looking at juvenile detention. Also, the part of girls that Abby is asking is super relevant, because there is this thought that girls are not affected by the gangs or are not, recruited. And actually, what we observe here from our data is that they are also recruited, not to be, in the violent parts or collecting or doing, homicide, but they are used as partners. And the thing that we can do, and I didn't mention this one, so the only way we wanted to measure things about sexual violence or what happens there, we have all the visits to health centers and why they were going, and we see a decline on visits related to teenage pregnancies, which were very related with gang abuses. So again, I don't have anything related. I should look at this data, whether in the records appears something about with the police, but that was not at least the issue that I'm aware. It's true that in the post period we will look, but at least the focus of this period website was a bit more preventive and middle ground to try to think about, outside of what we can do in these locations. We have seen that, the mano dura, mass incarceration was not working because how our prisons are. So what can we do? But we have to have something, that is middle ground. Okay. Anyway, okay, here I didn't tell you the result, but what we observe here is the first thing that we look is a reduction we see in dropout rates in these schools that receive the patrolling, which is very interesting because here we find similar as in other papers that I have, that is particular, the most pronounced effects are in these typical ages of recruitment into criminal organizations. You see a big decline there. And then we also validate these results where I say, okay, let's look at this gang recruitment data. Do we see fewer young being recruited there? And we actually see that that's the case. And that is also validated by this decline in juvenile detentions. And we also see that the effects are localized. It's in general, they are very local in the school surroundings and nearby areas, and consistent with this territorial control that I was telling you about how it worked, that they have these local cliques. And then for me, the most interesting question is, okay, now that we have like kind of a first stage, so is it the case that if I prevent you in some key ages of these gang interactions, is it the case that I'm not going to be part of them once I'm out of school? And which are the type of kids that would be part? And this is, I think, it's the most interesting, but of course, it's the most difficult for identification. But we try to shed light a bit on this by looking about how is these treated cohorts, where we see that most of the effects are concentrated, whether they are more likely or less likely to appear in our incarceration records, and by which type of crimes. And we see that that's the case. And when you look at these individuals that are all in the adult incarceration, we see that those affected individuals that were less likely to be recruited are less likely to appear in the incarceration records. And then we try to look on extortion, and we see that the decline in extortion happens in general. And this is the part that is also very interesting, and we have a model in the paper where we see that the increase in these labor costs that come from the policy, and now you cannot recruit these kids, end up affecting a bit extortion activities. But it's not immediate. It happens like 2 years after the policy that you start seeing like this gradual decline. And this is consistent with two things. First, with the objective of the preventive police that was not to reduce immediate extortion, And second is with how kids were assigned. How does it work, the labor trajectory? It's not that I recruit these kids from school and I put them immediately to do the extortion activity. No, we have some training which is related to be, indoctrinated to some violent practices. And once they are after that, then they are the ones that they start, once they gain confidence, to this extortion collection in these places. So that makes sense, so that you will see the decline after a while. And then we did a lot of work to try to understand whether they substitute into adults, whether they displace to other locations. And we don't see, at least up to 2019, and remember this because it's important, we don't see any evidence of spillovers or increase in adult recruitment. And we have some theories about why this happened. There was the special spillover, I told you before very briefly, it has to do with the organization of gangs that depends on small territories. Even though we are from the same gang, it's not immediate that I can go and recruit in Joe's territory. And the second one that I didn't mention that much is why they are not increasing the recruitment of adults here, which is very important. And here it has to do with many factors that I have a whole slide. But one is the fact that adults are much difficult to indoctrinate into violence practices. And this is something that came qualitatively a lot, is that children and adolescents are much more malleable. It's much easier to build an identity of the gangs than someone that is, 21 years old. And the second thing that I think is very important is that we always, when we think about criminalizations, we think about an illegal market that is drugs, where there is a lot of demand. So any increase in cost, I can pass through to prices. But here's extortion. The main business was extortion. There was no demand for extortion in this context that I will give you. So if you think about it here, and even when you have some estimates of the profits, it's not a very profitable business. They used to call it the mafia of the poor. So the markups are very thin. So any increase in the cost, if I want to pass it through prices by increasing the extortion rates, this can put out of business these other firms. So this is why any policy, what I want you to take from this talk is that you have to take into account the business, how they are organized for them to work. Because if it is a large territory and we are going, to some schools, and this will not have such a big effect. And then the other thing is, which is the main business and how much, these gangs can really strategically adapt to this shock to labor. Okay, so I think I gave you but so this is related. Here I put mostly the crime and policing literature, but there is a big literature about, what to do with crime. I think here what is interesting is that we are trying to provide some first causal evidence about how disrupting this recruitment in key ages can affect the expansion of criminal organizations and eventually also affect their businesses. And then this is related with what we were discussing before. We are trying to show how this preventive targeting policing at strategic locations can reduce crime without escalating violence, which is the main fear that we always have, at least like policymakers. And I think in this case, what we are showing is that the recruitment there works through this, through safety, not that much through this only punishing, by protecting key members at key ages, like in this place. And something that I haven't described is that the question that came to us is like, who are the ones that are joining these gangs? Of course, we don't have an answer to that, but there is something that we can do, which is that we, in the school, they have information about how the student was doing in school, whether it was overage, repeated the grade. And we can do some type of the analysis, and we can also link the last names of the kids with previous criminal records to try to see whether they have relatives that were in prison. So to try to see, okay, which is the type of student that is responding to this policy, kind of a compliers. It's not a compliers analysis because it's just an heterogeneity based on these baseline characteristics. But what we observe there is that it affects the average population, which makes sense because, as I told you in this context, they already have territorial control, so the gang could recruit kids as kind of they were. Once they have the territorial control, was one of the advantages. So it's not that there was a target in particular to higher risk. This doesn't mean that high-risk kids would be more likely to join. But what I'm telling you is that this policy can have an average effect to the whole population of students. So I think this is the, and then the other picture that I think we also are contributing is the one in illegal markets. As I told you before, a human capital formation is a lot of the picture in illegal markets. When we think about policies of deterrence, going back to Becker, it's a lot about industries or markets that have some demand. Here we are focusing on extortion. So this is and where we don't know that much. There are very few papers that Alejandro with the camera. There is not that much literature about how this business works. And then it's all the literature on human capital formation and the role of shocks during childhood can affect long-term outcomes. And here we are trying to show how evidence of like policies to adolescents can have long-term development effects beyond schooling and income support. Okay, so I'm good with time. Okay, let's go to the background and feel free to stop because there is a lot of background to go over. So the first thing that I want to discuss that is key to understand about also the relationship for gangs with the community is the origin of gangs. And something that's important here is that the gangs in El Salvador were not only the byproduct of conditions of El Salvador, but many of you have heard the story and many still have experienced this. If there was a civil war in the 1980s, a lot of families flee to the US from the conflict, and they were not in the best neighborhood. So the story of this gang is that some of the kids of this family, for some different reasons, they joined Barrio 18, the Mexican gang that was present in this neighborhood, and some others from MSRT. Then a lot of these kids grew up and they were deported back to El Salvador, a country that they didn't know that much because they didn't grow up but they brought some skills. And this is what I tried to show in another paper, and the deportation occurred in 1996. And what I observed is that when these leaders arrived to these neighborhoods where they were born, immediately you start seeing an increase in these gang-related members and gangs with US origin. Now you may be thinking, how do you know that they are part of gangs? Here, it was easier because they put the tattoos, so that was the way that how they identify the data. But what it is very important for the talk today is not only that they were from outside and they have been in the 1996 they started, and I'm looking at policy in 2015, so decades. So they have been there for decades. But then the other thing is how they expanded. And this is key because we can observe the trajectories of people and the ages that they have at the moment that the leaders arrive and see which are your probabilities based on the ages that you have, this is in the previous paper, to be incarcerated by gang-related crimes. And you can see here in this figure 8 from the other paper, the different ages that you have and whether you were, and the difference versus you were in that age in a neighborhood that received these gang leaders from the US or not. And you see that if you were younger than 17, your probabilities are much larger. So how did the gangs expand very quickly in the country? It was also taking advantage of this gap that they didn't have parents from the civil conflict, recruiting them into the gangs, okay? So this was something that was part of their strategy of recruiting local Okay, and the other thing that is important also for background is how they were organized. Okay, so before that, so another thing of context, the leaders that they deported were from rival gangs, from these two rival gangs. So these leaders, as I said, they have some specific knowledge about which things were important for the business of the gangs to develop. One was recruiting young individuals. This came from knowledge of LA, and also importance of terrorism. And that's why you start seeing these homicide rates that were very high. In El Salvador 2015, they have one of the highest homicides in the world. And mostly was due to these two main gangs, MS13 and Barrio 18, and they have around 70,000 members. And how they were distributed, how they were organized, the system was like, I think the easiest way for me to think is like if it would be a franchise, like system of different autonomous, semi-autonomous cliques that they control small pieces of the territory of a neighborhood. And then this allows them, not only a territory allows them to recruit kids, but also to extort inside those territories and also nearby areas. This was a very easy strategy because they could recruit inside the territory, and also, and this is something that we learned when we were doing another paper, is that it's not only that the territory allows you to extort in this territory that you control, but also you can just, if these territories are so small, you can cross the streets and start extorting also in places that are nearby, and then these gang members would go to the territory and hide. So it was a very easy strategies for them for extortion and also to recruit individuals. Okay, so this is a map that it is only for San Salvador, where you can see the territorial control of the gangs. I think it would have been much useful if I would have plotted. We have for certain locations where the cliques are located, and you can see that they are much smaller, but the clique would be, just a piece of this. But this is for you to have an idea about how it was in San Salvador by 2015. The gray areas are the areas controlled by the state, and the blue and dark blue are the areas that were controlled by gangs. As you can see, a lot of the main city of the country was divided between the states of these gangs. And territories rarely cross like this between the different gangs. It's not that you have
Is there competition between cliques?
If it is rivals, yes, there could be competition.
So within Barrio 18, can I compete
yes, they divided in two, I don't remember the year. So there was something of that. That is interesting for us to know whether in places that you have more competition, this recruitment is is this policy is more effective or less effective? If you think about it, it can be other way. When you have more competition, these places can charge lower extortion because they are also competing. That's why we have in the other paper. So these policies could be more effective in those locations. But also could be the other way, that when you have control of the territory and you are the only one, you are more likely to recruit kids. So we do some heterogeneity based on some measures of competition, because we have the homicide committed by gangs and by who. So we do an HHI where we interact around the school surroundings. And we see that there are larger effects of the policy in place. So you see effects for both, but there are much larger effects in places that used to have some competition before, which makes sense with this other story that I was telling you, that in those places, the markup of these gangs is smaller, so they are less likely to be able to react.
Wait.
Yeah.
Those are competition between the cliques, or those are at the borders of the purple and the blue?
No, how we are defining competition. So I don't know which are the territories. So the only thing that I can do is the proxy about whether they are competing or not in the school surroundings. How I do it is because I have the homicides and I know which gang committed. So if I have a place where it is, 50-50, that place has a lot of competition. So that's how we do it with different measures. But it's not that I have, it would be ideal if I would know one of these maps every year, and then you could see how it flips from one gang to the other. That would be the perfect measure. But here, yeah.
Sorry.
Our measure of competition is gang homicides. Yeah.
Is there some type of one level up and some type of arbitration? I'm thinking of the Italian mafia. You have competition, but then you can go one level up and the boss tells the cliques, okay, you stay here, you stay there, this is yours, this is yours. Do you have that?
We do have something that happened in 2016. In 2016, there was this pact between the gangs, and that generating this lack. In certain locations, we see a decline in the homicides and a decline on this HI. So there is something that happened in 2016. So what we are doing, to try to isolate from that policy as well, is just to control, because we know which were the places that were affected by the pact. But again, we are using the same HHI index. That's our measure. This is the key. As I told you before, how the competition varies, so we use that as proxy of competition between the gangs, the violence by different gang members. Yeah. But there was something like that. And actually, in this paper, we used that policy to see what happens when they divide the territory. Okay, so as I said before, now this slide is relevant, but the main business of gangs was extortion. And most of the revenue was extorting local business and distribution firms. This is important also to try to think about this how substitutable are between adults and adolescents, because if the business is not that profitable, then it's like you have less to increase. Like if you even think that they can increase wages to attract more, it's difficult. But what is interesting here, so and again, this is just to give you background, this shows all the places. So we have this data on the extortion amounts from the main distribution company in the country that was distributing to convenience stores and pharmaceuticals. And we know all the places that they were distributing the drug was going, which are these black triangles. And we also have the payments that they do to any time that they were stopped for extortion, which are the yellow and orange circles. And what you can see here is that they can be stopped many times. And something that we observed in that paper is that the extortion amount is highly correlated with the local demand for these goods. So if I'm distributing to a place that is in a rich neighborhood, I will charge much more to this track on extortion. So this is a measure of kind of price discrimination that they are doing. And this tells you that to do that, to know how much is the demand for that pharmaceutical that the track is distributing, you need to know a lot about the demand. And this is like some evidence about how much labor they need to know how much you are selling. And these are proxies that they do have, and they have in their records and so on. This is just to show you, they do a lot of extortion, they price discriminate. To do price discrimination, you need to know more or less what is the local demand. To know the local demand, you need a guy there checking how the business is doing. And that's what we observe in this other paper. And to cover that labor, you need to recruit children so that you can train. Yeah.
These businesses ever, if I'm near the boundary between two gangs, do I ever end up having to pay extortion to both gangs? Or only ever pay to one?
Yes, they could pay to both. They could pay to both. The data we have is not that good so the data on extortion that we have for this paper was 2012 to, I think also up to 2019. And you only have for 1 year to which gang, like the records of to which gang did they pay. And we would see that it could vary. Sometimes they would pay one member. And this is the thing, is that I could pay when I'm, let's see, here is not a good graph. Suppose I pay when I'm distributing to, so this is one colonia to this place, but that doesn't mean that since I pay when I provide goods to the convenience store, I will not pay in the other one. It's not like the Olken model, if you know, like that one of the corruption that then this allows you, it's a pass-through like toll. No, it didn't work that way. You could be already again stopped and have to pay.
Disorganized corruption,
Yes.
but with perfect price discrimination or something.
What?
With perfect price discrimination or something like that, right?
Yeah,
That's what you were saying. Yeah.
This is what I'm telling you. That's why I think it varied. Like they really took advantage of knowing. I know that this place, is selling much more to it. And that's why they didn't even have, I guess, distribution. So when you're distributing for certain, you don't have some contract with these gangs and say I'm going to pay you X amount per year. And they're like, no, they really vary, and it's mostly, but we observe that based on the demand that they are having. So they were very knowledgeable when a business was doing well or not. It's incredible how they know, and this is not only in El Salvador. So just to give you an example of another context in Peru, that when I was visiting, they even know when they have a relative that is outside in another country, and they know, okay, this person is working, I don't know, in Chile. We know that your family is receiving these remittances. You need to pay us this. So they have some information. I think that how it worked here, the territorial control was having information about a lot about you. It was like being kidnapped kind of in these neighborhoods. And correct me, Stephen, if I'm saying something wrong, because I know you have done a lot of work. And of course, sometimes we have different views, but for me, the view of visiting these territories was that the situation of people living in the territory was pretty extreme. And unfortunately, now there are many other places that are living in that situation. Okay. So extortion So very labor intensive. As I said before, it's not the most profitable business. Some estimates that 60 million, but divided 70,000 doesn't seem to be that much. And they depend a lot, the territorial control, on these recruits that they have. I already talked about this, so I'm going to, but it's mostly why they were recruiting these children there's something that I don't like saying that much because this can be taking the wrong direction about this, that they face less legal consequences, but this is something that came qualitatively, and this about the use of kids, but there are also these other reasons about like that they are also more malleable and easy to indoctrinate into violence. Okay, this is the reasons about why, and shock they couldn't adapt. This is a bit unfair that we put it here. We have it after seeing a bit the result, but it's mostly about like what I was telling you before. You cannot go easily and recruit in another's gang leader's territory, even if it is the same gang. It's not immediate that you can do it. Of course, in the long run, you will readapt this. As I said, like we're starting something in 2015 and they have been there since 1996. And then the one that is very important is this one, that they have a low extortion markup. And there is also something that I keep thinking about how it works, is about that there is some type of friction. I put friction there, but it's the fact that you cannot replace the low labor supplies of kids with adults, not only because they need some training adaptation to learn the extortion activities, but there is something that also when you look at this year, there is high turnover. So, and if these kids are not immediately doing extortion, and you discount a lot the future, you are not affecting today your activities. It's just for the next leader. So there could be something about that, about present bias that is also working to explain this lack of real behavior. Okay, why schools? Back in 2015, there was this extreme situation that a lot of schools were reporting that kids were killed on their way to schools because they were refusing gangs. Why doing it in schools and not other places like parks is because by this time there was a lack of use of public spaces and it was a good place where you would have a lot of children in school surroundings, and that's why they target those. The program. I didn't explain that much. I only told you that it was about this police patrolling that consisted in reducing the student gang interactions. But there was a second component that I haven't described that was a component of talks that the police would enter to the class and talk about the program. We have information about that. We see that actually, yes, it's true that the school have an average 2 talks more than the other ones. But and I will talk a bit about that, about like how much, because sometimes we were worried about the talks. It's like, okay, can we separate whether this is a shock to labor supply or demand? Because maybe they are redressing behavior of kids now joining. But since it's only 2 talks and we have some information about whether this change expectations, it's one survey, but we don't see that much. We really think that the big component with this of the police patrolling. And as I said before, we're using the 2015 that received the treatment. Again, the program was cut by the end of 2018. So we only have 2019 as data without the program. And then we have these schools that were pre-selected. They were in other municipalities, but did not receive due to the change in government. Okay, the 2 components I described, I didn't say, but it was on average like 3 to 5 police officers that they have to walk in 300-meter perimeter. In certain places, we observe with the data, they go even further, like 1,000-meter perimeter. Again, it was not a random police officer. They have to have some no prior violence record there. It was from the existing police unit. We can verify that because we have the data on the total police officer, and we don't see that there is any increase in the number of registered police officers. Then they have explicit guidelines that was to focus on student gang interactions, not extortion or other criminal activities. And then the not treated school, how you have to think about it is like business as usual. It's true that, and again, it's not that in these places the police could not enter. They could enter in these places, but what they were doing is just like walking in the surroundings, like randomly, but it was not with some specific focus, at least not these police patrols. So this kept happening in the control group. But here you increase the frequency that happens in the time of entry and exit of. So that's something that to differentiate what we are measuring here. Okay, here are some pictures about how it worked. The police officer was there, like in the surroundings. Here's another example about how it worked. The other thing is that it's not that they were have to be there every day, as Steve well mentioned before. There were constrained capacities here. So it's like the guidance was just to be like on average about 2 hours in the school surrounding, at least 3 times per week at random days. Okay. And this is another one of the talks, that they would get there and talk about how the program worked, because so that people in the community could familiarize about why the police were there. So we have the information about the patrolling events, and we see that yes, there is like kind of like they comply. In average, they have more of 80 more events in the schools than in the control group. At entrance and exit, we verify. In other times, there is not that much difference. I haven't showed this, but we also have in the records of the police in which places they did the talk. How do we know? It's because they have GPS records from the same police officer. It's not about the vehicle, so you can know whether they were really patrolling in certain times, and then we collapse that. So the data on that is very rich. This is another way of showing you that most happened before the entry, before 7:30, and in exit around 12 p.m. Okay, the data we use. You are all still here? Or okay, good. I will drop question at the beginning. Now it's I feel I'm talking at the end. Okay, the data. The data we have is education. Actually, I'm spending a lot of time explaining the background because already an hour and I didn't show you any results. Okay, the data we have is education records. In the result that I will show you now, how we define is like by number of students in that school that were enrolled in the previous year. But we also have other measures by the enrollment dropout rates that we validate to try to see and also whether they move to other schools. We also have the information about the treatment assignment. That one comes, it's geocoded that we have to link to the schools. And then we also have some baseline student demographics, which are very little, as I was telling you, was like gender is one, and the other one is how they were overage or repeated the grade in schools. And we have the crime index that they use for selection. So we have that, and that's what we use now to do like some type of matching diff in diff.
You have test scores?
No, we don't have test scores. So we have test scores, but the only test scores we have that we use is so they have this test that is done in the last year, I think, of high school. So it's kind of too late for us because we know that when we see the results, all the dropout and recruitment happens before those years, the last years of high school. So we only see whether there are compositional effects. So suppose that it is the case, if we have the assumption that gangs target the high-risk kids that are doing worse, then since they are not dropping out, in general, what you would observe is that now test scores decline, but we don't see that that's the case. Because as I was saying, the recruitment was more based on the place and not that much the individual focus. In this case, by 2015. Of course, when they started, probably they do. And something interesting that we are observing is that also for those that are in the last year of high school, we have these non-cognitive skills from the students. But again, this is only for the last, it's bad for us because it's not before they are actually recruited. But at least we can see whether there is some compositional effects about now who are joining the gangs. And if anything, what we observe is that the kids, after the policy is done, what we see in the composition, that it tends to be now, after the policy, the ones that have lower socio-emotional skills. So those are the ones that report. The policy was not target those. It was targeting more the average. But for those, you would need to complement with some type of CBT or...
Yeah, the other thing I was thinking was just, if these patrols are preventing sort of disruptions in general, you might pick it up. You could just say, hey, look, there might be a test score effect just in general.
Yes, we don't see that,
yeah,
no.
So that's helpful to sort of.
Yeah, that's good. And we also, the other thing on the data is, from school is that we don't have attendance. That's another one that we don't have. There is no, there are, at least where we don't have those records. Yes.
Hi, can I ask something about like the data that you got and also how you measure effectiveness? Because when I think about that, I usually think about sustainability and local ownership, also coming from a peace studies perspective. And I think policing, maybe I do have this perspective because I'm from Brazil and we are very skeptical about policing as a public policy for recruitment or for treatment. We usually think about how to sustain that and how to engage the local people in that situation, how to engage them to make something sustainable and long term. So having this in mind, I wanted to know if you also looked if those schools had, for example, peace education projects or restorative justice program in the long term to have a more like long-term impact and more sustainable impact. Because if you just put the policy and the policing, it might be good for a certain period of time when the kids are in school. But then is this being effective or just postponing the recruitment?
For the other, no, and I think that's okay. You have many questions, but let me remember the last one. So it's true that if you would take out the police, then they would start recruiting after some period again these kids, unless you recover the territory. This is for me, it's more like an experiment to try to see how this recruitment can be affecting at the individual level, whether you, that I stop your generation to be recruited, if then when you're older, you will still join the gangs or not. At least I can show that if I stop those key ages, then it's not that you will join when you are 19, 20. That's the first thing. Then the following is how much is this increase in the labor cost is affecting the business trying to see the extortion, okay? Those are the two things that you can see with this. Now, there is another discussion. Is this the right policy that we want to do or not relative others? Then we can have a long discussion about that, and I'm not sure. But it's a second best about how to prevent, if you cannot recover the territory, how to at least, increase the cost of these gangs. And I think that we all agree that focusing in recruitment and kids the part of choice on how much choice they have to join this organization is subtle. And I think that I think that if I push you a bit in terms of policy, I would prefer them, to recruit an adult that has some, identity already formed, like knows a kid that is or that doesn't know that much, but still will continue. That is true. How sustainable it will be is I cannot answer you because my data is up to 2019. So that's a limitation. But it just lies about other type of policy that you could do, no? For instance, something that I was thinking that you could do in the case of Brazil is like some type of focused deterrence based on recruitment. I provide you incentives for you to not recruit kids. So if you go and recruit kids or you join someone that is very young, I will give you a very high punishment, but I'm not going to focus on your drug business. Like you decide, given the constraints that you have on capacity, which type of illegal behavior that you want to, to target. And at least here, it can show you that at least for that generation, you have like some benefits. And I think that we all agree that if we can reduce at least that minor bad, it's better than nothing.
I know that you have very little time, Mika, but do you have prices and quantities of actually their business? Because you're saying, look, I'm going to increase their cost. Does that change the quantity in terms of extortions? There's less extortions?
Yes, we have extortion, but the only way that we can measure in these places, so we are now trying to get the permission to use the distribution company data to analyze that, because there we really have how much they were extorting. Here with the complaints, I only have the complaint of extortion. Yes. And I can more or less we have how much they were extorting from that complaint, but it's a subset.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a subset. And we see in the data it declines after like the second year, the extortion. Yeah. But yes, the policy is very relevant, and we can even discuss for idea about which is, the right policy, but at least like the first two, if you can take out from this talk, like the first two results that I told you, I think that shed lights a bit on policy. Okay. Okay, data. So this we already discussed, the gun profiling data. Again, it's not perfect, but at least it's using different sources. We also have these incarceration records and all the visit to health centers, which include injuries, teen pregnancy tests, and then when pregnancy-related visits that we use to try to see the effects also for girls. Okay, how we deal with data, and I think this I have to be very clear because sometimes it's confusing, is, for example, the gang recruitment. So we have all the events that happen in the school surroundings, but again, this is data that is difficult to observe. Even if you put observant, it's difficult to observe this and how you put it there in the data. So what we have is all those events. So we look at we do around the school this radius of 300 meters, and then we define a dummy variable about the probability that a recruitment event happened in the school. We also did a robustness by checking like the recruitment rate, okay? And we can also do the count of number of recruitment, but that's how you can see data. It's not that I'm linking at the individual level the kid with the ID with recruitment. We can't do that. We don't have that. So what we are doing is, and also it makes sense because it's a place policy that is in the surrounding school. So we were okay on doing this and not asking that merge of data. And then we have homicide, extortion that also come from the national police. And the youth detentions, we have it at the municipality level. And then we also have some socioeconomic indicators. Okay, peer kind strategy, we have it like the typical definitive. Ignore all this because now we are doing another way, which is like the normal event study, and also doing some pre-matching on that crime index and everything holds. But just to have an idea, okay, maybe it's easier for me to explain. Let's check this graph. This is the synthetic and this is the normal event study. What we're including in these regressions is a school, so the data on how it is for the dropouts is at the school level. For the recruitment, it will be schools and surroundings, okay? Just like to be clear on that I think I always present that and it's confusing because people think that I have links of individual level. And then our control group is just those schools that never existed. It's not a study, it's just like 2015, before and after, okay? Yes.
Okay, data on density, like a high frequency density or something, but it would seem like the 300 meters would catch more people in a dense area than in a real rural area where.
Yes, most of these places are urban areas, areas that have even the control group. We are doing, we have a robustness where we try to see for the spillovers whether, okay, maybe we are focusing everything inside the sample of the experiment, no? But what happens if we open to try to see what happened with nearby schools of the treated ones, what happens in rural areas is now that they move to rural areas and so on.
So you said that the program, the control schools were supposed to get the schools, but they didn't get it because of change in government. What happened to the program in the treated schools? Was that also canceled?
Yes.
So then do you see this positive effects reversing after?
No, because I cannot observe. This is the bad thing. I cannot, the only thing that is 2019, so it was kind of by 2018, but there is something there, but I wish I could have more data, and then you have also the pandemic. Yeah. So that's the thing that I cannot observe. But at least I can follow up these cohorts that they stop dropping out. I can try to link them to the data of incarceration of these years to try to see how it goes. That's the best I can do for more like long-term effects. But it would have been an idea to try to see like whether where the policy did some change on expectations and adaptation. We cannot do it, and this is the main limitation that how I will start this paper. Okay, then we can divide by cohort, and we can see that most of the effects are concentrated in these 6/9 relative to the control group. This is exactly the same that I told you just now. And how much this would represent, if we use the continuous measure, it would be like declining at 20% the time of that click, of the size of that click in that moment. more or less. Then we use also the recruitment data, the juvenile detentions, and we see that there is also a decline, but about 10%, but relative to the mean, this is very big because it's like a 50% on those, which, how can I click? Because I want to show you the dynamics so that you can see that how it works. Is there a way that I can click here? I don't know.
What do you need to do?
Just to show like the results that are here, because these are the dynamic effects. I think it's nice to see that they are on the same, timing as the dropout.
That it?
This is the total effect. So this is the total effects for all ages. Can you move one more so that we can see it by the different ages? The next one. This is this is kind of related. It's not by. Continue for the next one. This is not done. There is nothing there. Continue one more. Because, no, it's not this one. What we did, I have the graph separated by the different grades, and you could see that there is that decline in the recruitment. Sorry, can you go back to the slide? Actually, I can do it with this, sorry. So just click this one, back. Okay.
Just a question on the sixth and upgrade.
Yes.
That these schools, are the schools that are treated, are they K through 8? Are they public, private? Are these?
It's public, most of them are public, and we have some schools that they finish in primary school. So what we do for those is trying to track, because we can look in the dropout rates whether they are in another school that is secondary school, even though it's not in the same location. So we can do that, and that's how we also define it. But yes, we have in our sample some that you don't have both. Is that what you're asking? If we have primary, like.
I'm curious about where you find the effects largest. So you're only able to find those large effects
In places that did not have.
that have the middle schoolers. Or because you're treated, the kids that are treated are in that school.
Yes.
So if you're treated in your middle school, you have larger effect sizes?
Yes. But so I think the way of the best I can answer that question is that I can keep in my sample the ones that they have also high school, and show you that there are effects as well.
And so do you split that to see what the separate effects are for middle schoolers who go on versus middle schoolers who are directly treated?
No, we don't. We only have a subsample where I can, because my only concern that I have is that for some of the measures of dropout, for example, if it's in the previous, if it's like that school, it could be all driven because they don't have, the other one. But I haven't done to try to see, I see where you are going. I could do that as well. Even
being directly treated in that
yes,
versus indirectly treated.
Yes.
And then have you done heterogeneity by school size? So if I have a large, you have.
Yes, we have done that.
And
it's similar effects.
It's similar.
It's similar effects. It's like there is no differential there on size. Yeah, because they are very similar because of how they did the index, and they try to target a school of similar sizes and urban areas. Yeah.
But that has you framed this in a model of the demand for labor in the gang.
Yes.
Right. And so if I have a target and I'm demanding 5 kids, and I go to a school where they've got 60 kids versus of that age group, versus I demand 5 kids and I go to a school and there's only.
Let me see if we have enough variation, because what I'm trying to tell you is that most were very similar on sizes. It's not that I have like the rural that have in my control and treated, I can do that very well.
But you may, because of the different streams.
Yes, right. Yes, but I can do it with this as you were telling me with the difference. If you don't have middle school, what happens? That we can do, and we haven't done it.
Right. I have a question.
Yes.
Regarding it's somewhat related, not quite, but the human capital literature emphasizes parenting. I wonder about the role of parents in the analysis or their recruitment decisions. So, the most natural thing to me would be if someone tries to recruit my children and I take them to school, I would potentially deter that.
Yeah, by keeping them at home with homeschool, yeah, that could be.
Or even if I take them to school, I don't mind if there's a gang member, I will confront them. Versus someone whose parents are not that present, I guess, that's
Yes, I don't have a way of, so the only thing I can tell you is that it was difficult with this context of 2015 of confronting. It was a bit dangerous. People were very scared of confronting a gang member. But I agree with you that parenting part, it would be good in other contexts. Again, that's why I emphasize 2015, because it was an extreme situation where you have this territorial control and these all other variables where you can like try to change behavior of individuals, of the parents. They can work, but first you really need to provide this safety of security. And then we can also work on this defense. The only thing that we do to try to shed light a bit about the parenting is the heterogeneity on whether you have a relative that was related to gang. And how we measure that is whether that relative was incarcerated before you were in school, with the last names that we could do that, because it was not the kid main thing, but it was like some relative. And if anything there, what we observe is that if you come from a family that already have the criminal networks, this policy is mitigated. Because of course they can recruit you in other ways, okay? So that's the only thing that we can do. But it's key, and this goes to your question before about the policy. So I don't know your name, but it was like very fair. In other contexts, parents can play a big role on trying, to supervise like the kids and everything. Here, I think it was so extreme that you really needed at least that's my take, to work a bit with law enforcement in certain way to gain security. And of course, complement them with these other measures. Okay, long run. Okay, so this is the easiest way to put in a graph is, so we have all incarceration data from 2015 until 2019. And what we can try to think is about different ages that were affected in 2015 when the program started in this school that were treated relative to the other ones. Because we know the addresses of residential of the people that are in prison. That allows us to link to whether there were in this 300-meter radius, okay? That's how we are doing it. And what we observe, if we use the data of 2018, you start seeing that for this cohort, the probability that be in prison in 1819 is much lower. In 2021, if you were 1718, nothing. So this is actually, for me, was a good, for your question about like whether they are really increasing, incarcerating everyone, that's what happened. At least that doesn't seem to be the case. And you can do this for the other years, no? 2019, then I can see more cohorts, not only the 15, 16, also 14, and you see a decline. I have also, I don't want to predict, but we have the other years, which is 2015, where you wouldn't have to see any decline here, and it's all super flat. It's incredibly flat for other years. So this at least tells you that when you target these 15, 16, 14 years old, you're preventing them to enter into this cycle of gun violence or being part of that group. So this is just to show you the same thing in table format. And the decline, we also can see the type of crime that you are, that declines, and is the one that is related to gangs, no difference in the other ones. And also we have the affiliation. Then the other thing that we, okay, maybe I went super fast, but I think I have 10 minutes. What I show you in the other graph is that basically if I stop you in those key ages, then you wouldn't appear in the incarceration records as adults, okay? And in particular, those cohorts that were living in those areas when you have the police patrolling and where we saw that the recruitment declined. Now the next question is like, that for me is the most interesting, but it's the most suggestive here, and I will be fair because it's a thing of data, is how does this translate on the main activity of the gangs, which is extortion? And here you start seeing some effects, but mostly starting after 2 years of the program, which is consistent with the story that these kids are not immediately doing extortion, but that they are trained in violent practices and indoctrinated, and then Once they gain the trust of the gang member, they are assigned to extortion.
So the kids are actually doing them. It just seems to me like a kid himself couldn't do the extortion. It's gotta be the threat behind the kid, right? The kid's just doing the election. Is that right?
Yeah, that's why I'm telling you, like when they are recruited, they are not doing it directly. It's after 2 years that they start, it seems, from the data. Yes.
I have a related question that I wanted to ask you for, but if you have, when they go to the juvenile centers, like what is the reason why they go? Because when I was thinking about recruitment like in Brazil, a lot of the stories that you hear is that they just carry small amounts of drug and they have a comparative advantage because they have a lower probability of getting incarcerated for that.
Yes.
But here, like, if this is not the main business, they are extorting. I have the
Yes.
same, like, how are they training them then? I mean, are they coming together in groups or why are they going to the juvenile center? How do they go about it?
So, yes, they get mostly for, at least the data is homicides. This is very bad because homicide, and it's something that, this is qualitative, at least that as part of the indoctrination, it requires them to go to these places that compete and commit homicides. So they do a lot of that. At least like by that, and it's something that we observe a bit on the juvenile detention, that this is one of the main. Yes, it's true that extortion is very difficult to prove. I'm with you on that. But for the homicides, it's violent parts of like even like going and threatening someone. I think that also appear in the data, but maybe I should show it like more descriptive about which is the main.
Can I ask a related question? This is homicides in general, in the is homicides from juveniles or?
No, this is homicides in general.
Right.
This is another source.
Do you have records on like who, because you have that criminal records of that period, right? So you can see whether
We could see that by the ages you want to show this. Yes, we could do it. Yes. We have, I think we have at least we have several sources of the homicide. One is the registro forense. So we have the age, yeah. Yes. Yes, right.
So your previous slides showed that incarcerations were changing, but that's from a data name match of who shows up in incarceration.
No. So how we are doing it is in the incarcerations, we have the address of where you were living before being incarcerated. Okay.
So do you have a problem where if
and then
what's happening with migration out? So
okay, good. You're bringing that out. So our best thing that we can do for the migration is, so we have some records of deportation and try to see whether in this place, there's two things we can do. One is using this movement across schools where they are less likely, to see another school after the program. We don't see that that's the case, that is increasing or now people are leaving or less likely to leave. And then we have deportation data, which is what they were telling me is that when someone is stopped in Mexico, it's more or less 1 month since they left. So we can look in those records from Mexico, whether those deportees is the best proxy of migration, whether that changes in this, and we have the addresses. So we can look if these places we are seeing less of these migrations.
So I guess my concern is that what shows up as an incarceration effect really isn't, it's just that they've left and that they're out of the population, that they're less likely to be incarcerated because they're also not around. Is that a possibility with the data?
No, actually it would be the contrary. And now they would be more likely to be around because the area is safer.
I don't know if I get more schooling and then I move for job opportunities, or if there's something else with dynamics where I'm able to get out. I don't know, but
okay. I see.
I'm just worried that you're missing some sort of a denominator, and that the incarceration, the drop is that it could or you could rule it out with other data, right? You could say it's not in that direction.
So we do the incarceration rate and it's similar when we do also the probability with just putting the dummy. But I see what you are saying. You are thinking that these kids that are now not recruited, I'm not seeing here because they are out of the sample. But then that would happen only in particular for those ages. Why wouldn't it happen like, let's go here. Why only 12, 15, 16 and not 17, 18?
So suddenly my family has enough money and hope, and so they send me abroad to go study and go do something. I don't know, you could.
Yes.
You can make a story.
Yeah, I think if anything, you see the opposite, that they are more likely of what I remember about
Yeah.
this,
But to
using the migration across schools, but you're right, we should show it
out.
you're right, yeah.
We make it let her finish.
Yeah.
No, but that's the point, like to try to look, yes, whether they are moving or not. Maybe here I'm very biased about like the research and other papers where I feel like if anything in this place they are less likely to be able, but we need to show it, and definitely we can include this, we can include.
I have a related question very fast about.
Yes.
Very good. I'll let her finish. Okay, so no question. I was getting confused.
Yeah, let her finish.
Yeah, okay. No, but okay, this one is related. Let's.
I was trying to help you out.
So yes or no? You tell me.
Yeah, go for it.
So very big. In Mexico, there's a lot of policy attention on disappearances and forced recruitment of people, particularly migrants. That I was thinking, perhaps if you don't observe substitution toward locals. I don't know how migration is controlled in Salvador, but in Mexico, the cartels, what they do is they recruit people who are on their way to the United States. So maybe someone is coming from Central America to the US, maybe the gangs recruit them instead. I don't know how realistic that would be, but I think it could be.
Substitution that would be happening. What?
Extortion seems to be a non-tradable service. Though. Hard for people in the US to extort people in El Salvador.
Yes, so that's why I think that this was for me also convincing, because you are seeing that it has some real effect also on their business. Okay, it's not the best, but even if they are, substituting, you should see like all this directly not changing. They can talk more. Maybe I'm not understanding. I'm reading your question. If they are now substituted by recruiting people that are leaving to the US. Instead of
right, exactly. I mean, at least that's the case in Mexico, right? And extortion is also not tradable in Mexico, and extortion is a crime in Mexico as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that could potentially be a channel, but just to float it out.
Okay. Yeah. No. I have to think a bit more about it, but yeah. Yep. Okay. So now in the last 4 minutes. Okay, let me show you. Okay, why not incapacitation? Okay, I think we already discussed it because we don't see an increase in the other ages. Here we have homicide committed by the police, doesn't seem to be changing that much. So let's go to a strategic response. The good thing is I have, I think, 2 tables to show you more, 2 figures, and I think that don't worry, there is not more. I know it's a lot of information. So remember that we discussed about whether we were thinking, okay, we are targeting these schools, and maybe now as a gang, I have control of this clique, and I'll go and substitute to nearby schools. So the best we can do is doing the donuts in the surroundings of the treated and controlled schools within our sample, okay, the ones that were supposed to be treated and not, and then checking in the surroundings. If anything, it seems that you still see a reduction in nearby places of 1 kilometer, and this again is due to the policy because, as I told you in the data, we observed that also we're likely to go more than the 3 meters. But at least, and we were a bit worried about this outcome that, okay, maybe there is some increase in like very further away, like the recruitment. But when we look at the other outcomes that we have geocoded, this goes in the opposite direction, like no effects. So again, this is consistent with this idea that the territories are small and it's difficult to substitute geographically, at least immediately, no? And we also do these aggregate effects and trying to include also other schools that were not controlled. And then this table, I think, is is interesting because I mentioned that we have also data on non-recruitment by ages. And if anything, first of all, the probability of being recruited, being adult recruiting surroundings is small, but there are no effects still there for these adults. What we are doing now is trying to see if there is an increase in adult recruitment, not in the surroundings of school, but actually in neighborhood clique, and also we didn't see that much. And then there is another thing that we were really thinking very hard about how to think whether what they were doing in prison, that was another place where they could be recruiting individuals. And the best we came out was to try to think, okay, we know that one way of communication of the gangs with these gang leaders, the ones that are in the streets, is through visits. And we tried to look at that. It seems there is some evidence that the visits to these gang members that were from those locations start receiving more visits, but it's suggestive. I will not make that much. It seems that there is something going on there, but I cannot rule completely whether they are really recruiting this location. But the data is very rich that I think we can do much more on this. Yeah.
You should conclude. We don't give stoppage time.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, perfect. And this is what I was telling you about girls, that there are also something there with dropout that is reduced. And these are the health visits. This is the heterogeneity that I was saying before, that for, if anything, for those that have relatives that were related to gangs, the effects are mitigated. Okay, I'm going to skip all this. And then I'm just going to conclude with the things that I want you to take away. The first thing is, the idea of this paper is how to think about policies that target child recruitment. It can be other ones, but at least here it shows that there are some benefits that are concentrated in these entry ages that can persist to adulthood. Also, there is some areas that will show that the shortage in this labor supply can have some impact on the business of these gangs. It's not that it's not obvious that they can, increase the prices and then pass through this cost. Something that I didn't put on that emphasis is that in this context where you have territorial control, the recruitment extends the low-performing students, and also the average students can also have gains of these policies. Also, I didn't pay that much attention to this because I didn't have time, but we provide new areas. In general, there is no work for women, and here we are trying to show also that girls potentially could benefit. An idea is trying to, now the part of policy, is trying to shed light about how we can still work with law enforcement by having some preventive strategy compared to just doing this alternative mass incarcerations of cartel. And thank you so much.